We acknowledge that CVUUS gathers on the land of the Western Abenaki people. We respect their spiritual relationship to the land and hope to learn from them how we can live in balance with the earth. There's an opportunity coming in June for us to learn more about our Abenaki neighbors when they are having a special weekend at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum on June 17th and 18th. And I encourage you to attend. There'll be workshops, drumming, dancing, and singing, and it would be wonderful if somebody were willing to sort of organize a group to go from CVUS together. So you, Liam? All right, so I suggest, and it is done. How amazing. I will repeat that on Saturday the 17th, Liam is going to go at 11 o'clock, and he has put something in the newsletter for June to help organize that. So a great opportunity for connection. I would like to welcome you to CVUUS on, I think, what they call the first official weekend of summer, Memorial Day weekend. And this is actually going to be the first summer I'm not at summer camp in 43 years. And so I am going to learn what I hope all of you already know as to what to do in summer besides corral girls and women around the campfire. I'm actually going to be gone for the month of June to try to see what a real vacation is. I'll be in Maine and hopefully visiting the Belfast UU Church, which is the area that I'll be in, and I always find it very interesting to visit with other UUs whenever I travel and I'm able to be there on a Sunday morning. So I'll be here with you in spirit. We have hearing assistance for those folks who that would be helpful for. It's in the back, and you can pick that up from the folks back there. It's a good time to remember to turn off your phones and put them in worship mode now that the service is going to begin. We'll have a social time after the service downstairs in the Ann Ross Fellowship Hall. And this morning's service is run by Reverend Barnaby Feeder, who is our settled minister for about one more month before his retirement. And it's my pleasure. This is my final service as worship associate for Barnaby, so that makes this a little more special for me. You all have the month of June, so. There are some different ways for pathways to connection that are in your order of service, but I would like to highlight pretty much all of them for you. The Rhubarb Festival is a week from yesterday. And the folks will be downstairs. You can see the huge sign. And I'll let you read the details, but I was told that there's plenty of rhubarb for people who have agreed to make pies or cobblers or other sweet treats. It's in the freezer or the refrigerator. You don't have to ask anybody. Take as much as you need or want, and use that for making your treats. There's also a new exhibition downstairs of quilts. I know that Catherine Schloff and Dorothy Mammon, and I'm not sure who else has quilts down there, but maybe Abby, did you? Not, nope, okay, so look for those. Coming up June 4th in the late afternoon, a group of us here at CVUUS, along with folks from other religious faiths in the area, have been working on ways we might help improve the housing situation in Addison County. And there is a really nicely put together program to explore some options for all of us, including the tiny homes being built at the Hannaford Center, Home Share Vermont, and also how to take a part of your property for an ADU and funding that might be available. And we have some experts in our congregation who will be speaking, as well as other people representing those organizations. So it's a very exciting thing for us to have spearheaded. It is happening at the Congregational Church, but I encourage you to go. The Caring Network has surveys, and this is the last weekend to complete the yellow form, so if you haven't done so already, please pick that up. And finally, a week on June 3rd, longtime member Margot Fenn Borden will have a celebration of her life at the Waybury Inn from 1:30 to 4:30, and her daughter Lori, who was one of the very early members of CVUUS, will be coming in from Montana along with her kids to be there. So I hope some of you can attend that. So with all of that business taken care of, it's we can now sort of gather ourselves and our thoughts for the call to worship for this morning's service. It comes to us from Robert French Levins. It's the number 416 in the book, but I'm going to read it so you can just maybe close your eyes and think about the words. Holy and beautiful the custom that brings us together in the presence of the Most High, to face our ideals, to remember our loved ones in absence, to give thanks, to make confession, to offer forgiveness, to be enlightened and to be strengthened. Through this quiet hour breathes the worship of the ages, the cathedral music of history. 3 unseen guests attend: faith, hope, and love. Let all our hearts prepare them place. And now, if you'll join in singing our gathering song this morning, which is number 128 in the gray hymnal. Words are on the screen. For all that is our life. Our chalice lighting this morning comes from Peter Samoyski. If you'll join me in saying the words as Barnaby lights our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. May this flame we light remind us that every one of us can bring the light of love to the world. May this clear flame be a symbol that every heart can burn bright with joy, peace, and harmony. May the wisdom of the ages speak to us through this flame and stay with us. every one of us can be a blessing to the world.
Thank you. Now we're all set. Thank you. And thank you, Ellen, for choosing that reading. Just by happenstance, the person who wrote that is the current minister of the Unitarian Church in Prague in the Czech Republic. And next week at the Flower Communion, we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Flower Communion, which was invented by Champlain, the founder of that church. So there's a nice tie-in between this week and next week. But next week, we won't have Chuck as our pianist. We rarely have Chuck these days because he retired from being our accompanist. But I'm fortunate enough to have him here today, and I'm going to take advantage of that because in the temporal ages, which is directed at our young people, you might not know that Chuck was the longtime music teacher at Mary Hogan School. Some of you do. And outside of Mary Hogan, Chuck is a really great jazz pianist. So I wanted to do something that related jazz to our theme. And some of you may know from the title, Take 5, that we're headed towards the best-selling jazz song of all time by the David Grand Quartet. But before we get there, I want to talk to the kids because in church, music is put together and often it comes to us from hundreds of years ago. And most of the music is divided up into pieces that have one of two very familiar ways of putting music together. One of the ways is basically a waltz with 3 beats to every measure, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And some of us may not realize that we have waltzes in the hymnals, but there's some of our favorites. So Chuck is just going to remind you of one of our favorites. There's actually 3 different songs in our 2 hymnals that use that tune, but the one we sing most often is Blue Boat Home. I don't know if any of the children have been here when we sang that, but someday we'll make sure we sing it while you're with us, because it's a beautiful song about living on the earth and in the universe and being in touch with the earth. And it's a waltz. You almost want to dance the minute you hear it. Most of our church music, though, is descended from things that had a much firmer beat to them and actually evidence of people marching. So they're either 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to have Chuck play a little bit of a piece that's often played when some person is becoming a new minister and all the ministers march in for the ordination. It's called Rank by Rank. You just see people marching to that. And interestingly enough, that was written in England in the 1800s by for the Salvation Army for a children's march. We put different words to it. And one of the things that's been very interesting about the 20th century and the 21st century is that it has been combining lots of different musical forms together to make new music. And that very much fits what we do here at church, where we like to have diverse ways of thinking and diverse ways of celebrating come together because we think it makes something new and exciting. So one of the things that has happened in the 20th century is people started putting together that waltz feel with that march feel and creating music that was broken up into pieces of 5 beats and then 2 beats so that the measure would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what made that famous is this jazz piece, Take 5. And so I want you to listen to this. There's a couple versions of it. The most famous one goes on for 6 or 7 minutes, and because it's jazz, there's a lot of variations, beautiful variations. So if you haven't heard Take 5, I highly recommend that you go on the internet and listen to it all the way through. Dave Brubeck Quartet. But one of the things that I wanted to say to our kids is that we've been inspired by this beautiful music that started coming out by combining things, and some of our newer hymns that we sing all the time are built by that same 5 beats to the measure structure. And I'm just going to say a couple of the names, and we'll see how many you recognize. One of them we sang very recently, the Harry Belafonte song, We Come From the Mountain, and then Fire of Commitment is another 5/4 song, and Standing on the Side of Love, as it was written now, retitled Answering the Call of Love, are all tunes written in the same structure as Take 5. So it's been an exciting time with new music coming into our lives by putting things together that weren't put together before. And we hope as you kids grow up and as grown-ups try to stay young, we keep putting things together that weren't put together to make things that were beautiful that never existed before. And so I invite you to go off to your fun time now with Jess and Mary, and may your roots grow deep, your branches spread wide. May you find the world to be a wonderful place and leave it even better. The donations team wanted to do something about food insecurity, which is a big problem in Vermont, often, especially for young people in the summer when the school lunch programs stop. And this food pantry in Bristol has a nice track record of serving their community, and it's small enough that our donations will really help them. So we invite you to be as generous as you're able as we take this offering. Johnny and Catherine bring the offering forward, we invite you to stand in body or spirit and sing from You I Receive, with which we receive the offering. We'll go 3 times through. I didn't receive any additional yellow cards this week, but for those of you who know anything about our congregation, there was a giant yellow card of a week because Jerry Loney died this week, and a longtime participant in many facets of the life of the congregation, but particularly our children's program and in helping us take care of our campus here. Jerry was very handy and always ready to volunteer, and he will be deeply, deeply missed. We will have a memorial service for him here almost certainly on the morning of July 8th, which is a Saturday. Even though I will have retired as your minister before then, I have dispensation from the board to do that service. So I will be in the pulpit helping us with that celebration of life. And you'll hear more details as we go along. Obviously, there are many other joys and concerns and milestones and passages. There's graduations all over the place this week. We have some youth from the congregation who have been successfully competing at a very high level in various competitions. I'm looking at the Sessions family and the crew from Bates, which Lydia is on, was 4th in the nation, right, in Division 3. And I know that's just one of many things that's going on. So I invite everybody into a time of silence to get in touch with what's on their hearts before we go further with this service. ask Chuck to play the music to take us out of this time of silence. Blessed Spirit of My Life by Shelley Denham Jackson. She was the longtime composer in residence at the Mountain, which is a UU's summer retreat perched on the edge of a precipice in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, a stunningly beautiful setting. And for me, symbolic of a lot of the wonderful UU summer places you can go, whether it's Star Island or Ferry Beach in Maine or the mountains in Adirondack, and there's ones all over the country. So if you ever have a yen to spend a little more time around UUs and community, but not just your UUs here, you might check out one of the different summer settings where they have all kinds of sessions. But let's stand in body or spirit and sing Blessed Spirit of My Life. It's number 86 in the Great Hymnal for those of you who read music and want to follow along there. But the words will be here. Chuck's going to play it through once. It's a pretty simple tune. I think you'll catch it right away.
Give and take and reading in unison that I find familiar and comforting. So our reading is number 583 in the Gray Hymnal, The Young Dead Soldiers. It's by Archibald MacLeish. It was written 80 years ago this year and is published in many different places. I will read what we call regular type, if you'll respond in the italics. And it is on the screen. So you're going to read the thicker words. The young dead soldiers. The young dead soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them? They have been a silence that speaks for them at night, and when the clock counts. They say, They say, we have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done. They say, we live in our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know where our lives escape. They say, our deaths are not ours, they are yours. They will mean what you make of them. They say, They say, we leave you our deaths, give them their meaning. We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us.
So those of you who were here on Mother's Day or who listened to the service online that day or thereafter will recall that I suggested that Unitarian Universalism called us to rescue the day from the ways it has been abused. And the primary way to do that was to radicalize its love components, lift them up, grow them, make our memories our day of that day out of them. Well, to put a bow on May, we're going to do the same for Memorial Day. Let's make it memorable by nurturing whatever we can find in it that expands the domain of love, and I'm using love with a capital L there, the domain of love in our lives. The heart of what I have to say to you is grounded in this stack of yellow cards that I saved from my first year as your minister. I saved them because it was part of getting to know who you were and how I might better serve you. Some of them don't have dates, so they aren't in a particular order, and you're going to see that that doesn't really matter. The things that you shared during Milestones and Passages played a major role, a really important role in my getting to know you, because they fed my thinking about how we might be together in ministry to bring our values to life in ourselves, in the wider community, and indeed in the world. But before I go there, I do want to spend a moment with the kind of sacrifice associated with the history of Memorial Day, death while in military service. I don't want to just walk right by the meaning of this holiday for so many people who have been in combat. No one has captured the special nature of this sacrifice better than Archibald MacLeish in the poem Ellen and you just recited responsively. They say, we were young, we have died, remember us. They say, we leave you our deaths, give them their meaning. The poem was written, as Ellen said, in 1940. What became World War II was already raging in Europe, and the United States was on the eve of being drawn into it. But the poem was written by a middle-aged man working in the Library of Congress who had lived his emotions that were embodied in the poem for more than 20 years. MacLeish had been an ambulance driver and then an artillery officer through some of the most brutal fighting at the end of World War I in 1917 and 1918. And during that same time, his younger brother, Kenneth, had become a new type of warrior, a military airman, and he was shot down and killed in action just weeks before the war ended. Think about what the poem grew out of, and think about the environment in which it was written, how much felt like it was going to hell in 1940. I see the call to give such deaths their meaning as a call to radical love. And I think back to a congregational conversation several years ago where we collected our thoughts about what radical love means to each of us. We had stumbled on this phrase, and we intuitively thought it was important, but we needed to spend some time working out what it meant to us. We had this congregational conversation, among other things, and one of the thoughts whose wellspring was in that congregation, but it's unknown to me who first started to formulate this thought, I later summarized this way: get clear about what you love. Radical love doesn't come out of nowhere. It starts out of amplifying the love we already live with and within. Get started. Now, it's a rare UU congregation today, though, that's run by people, or involves a lot of people who have been directly connected, as Archibald MacLeish was, with military death. The need to give such death meaning might feel like a task we're not equipped for. For most of us, it might almost feel like a misappropriation of someone else's cultural rituals. But we are all complicit in the wars our country ends up in. The deaths we are called to give meaning to start with the young dead warriors. But surely the deaths we must reckon with also include opponents and countless civilians who have been unarmed victims. And I would say they also include the soldiers who joined up in part because they received no respect at home because of racism and other oppressions, who survived the fighting and then came home to find disregard for their service. That's another kind of death in battle. And so I feel obligated on this weekend to begin with a search in me for the raw feelings McLeish must have felt in writing that poem. The most personal military death gets for me is reading about and trying to imagine what the very young man who later became my father experienced firsthand. He was a 21-year-old junior officer on a destroyer in the Pacific Ocean in the last stages of World War II. Dad's ship, the USS Shannon, was constantly exposed to Japanese kamikaze and bombing attacks as it supported the ground troops making assaults on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. One damaged attacker destined to crash into the sea just 25 yards from Dad's ship miraculously passed between the Shannon's two smokestacks, destroying only a radio antenna. The explosion on the impact when that pilot crashed into the sea soaked everyone on the deck in an avalanche of seawater and gasoline. Numerous plane fragments ended up on the ship. On another occasion, a Japanese torpedo passed 25 yards in front of the Shannon as it maneuvered sharply to train its guns on airborne attackers. More harrowing still was the fate of a sister ship, the Aaron Ward. It was struck over the course of May 3rd, 1945, the 40th day of the assault on Okinawa, by multiple suicide bombers. The Aaron Ward was left burning, powerless, with scores of dead and wounded soldiers, and in danger of sinking, some 75 miles from where the Shannon was refueling. By the time the Shannon, which was sent to help, reached the Aaron Ward, it was 9 p.m. Fortunately, clouds blocked the moonlight. Lacking radio contact, it took an agonizing 2 hours of maneuvering to establish a tow line connection. And then the Shannon towed the Aaron Ward 45 miles to a repair base on another island. They traveled at a peak speed of just over 6 miles an hour. They were almost sitting targets every time the clouds parted. The Shannon had guns to fire back if needed, but virtually no way to maneuver defensively with the damaged ship in tow. At one point, they could see off in the distance that the repair base was under air attack. But that attack waned, and somehow they arrived safely. I read about these and other incidents in a Shannon reunion booklet that was published in 2000. Dad never talked about such experiences as narrow escapes, although it's hard to see how you could think of them as anything else. His sympathy was entirely with the Marines and Army troops fighting to seize those strategic islands. The Shannon was periodically ordered to support the ground troops with close-in bombardment. The carnage was clearly visible at these times through Dad's binoculars, and heartbreaking. The rest of the time, the Shannon was further out at sea on another dangerous mission. It was called picket duty. They were part of the first line of defense against air attacks on bigger, more important ships. Like so many dutiful volunteers before him, Dad was content after the war to leave it to others to tell survivors and future generations what to make of the chaotic and brutal sacrifices he witnessed. Somehow, it occurs to me that the best jumping off point would be milestones freely shared in a sanctuary dedicated to affirming that every life is precious and unique. And that's why I'm moving on to our milestone cards from 10 and 11 years ago. So I'm going to start with one from Mitch Kramer. Mitch says, this comes from when he was walking to church one morning, there's a lost dog from the gray house near the church on Water Street. It's an ancient yellow lab named Amos. I learned from a frantic woman who was searching this morning. It's got a plaid collar. It got loose last night. Please call the Middlebury police if you find him. Now, for me, this is about, even when we're coming here to be together as a community of love, you never know what opportunity is going to be thrown into your path. And the fact that Mitch would find out what was happening and come and share it with you, despite the odds being very slim you were ever going to find this ancient yellow lab, to me says a lot about who you were. There were numerous birthday cards in that first year, there always are, but I wanted to hold up two. One of them came from Sterling Sidaway. Some of you may remember Sterling had an incredible voice, and as a 7-year-old, he sang at my installation, Family Tree from Tom Chapin's album. Sterling submitted a card one day, which it's very rare to get a card from a child, and he said, today is Loden's 4th birthday. Loden was his little sister. So that's one end of the scale. At the other end of the scale, I got a card from Gus Swift, then well into his 90s. Happy birthday to Art Lee Wilson from a fortunate father. And getting these two in proximity really gave me some idea of the span of who we are. And we also had that first summer I was here, we had a service where we broke into small groups and we asked people to share their first memories. And Gus was in a small group with a child, and the child remembered something from last year, and Gus's first memory was the church bells pealing at the end of World War I. Again, really, really amazing thing to tell us who we are. I got a few cards that, in retrospect, were the beginning of full circles. Dorothy Mammon gave me this milestone in February 2013. My partner Fred and I are charting a new course, both of us retiring from our jobs in the next few months, renting our house and exploring living on board a sailing boat. High hopes. I am also ecstatic to be joining Ellen Flight on staff at Camp Sangadiwan this summer. Living the dream. Well, as those of you who know Dorothy know, she went on to live on that boat for a long time. She even recorded a service for us at sea, at which we played one Sunday in January. And she learned a lot living on that boat, but they have now retired from the boat. So that circle is completed. And Ellen has retired from Sangadiwan, and that circle is completed too. And after all those years of working for Ellen, they remain best of friends. So that circle goes on. A bunch of you probably won't remember Rebecca Zellis. She was a young mother and her husband didn't come very often, but she had two incredibly gifted children, Luke, who had a number of physical ailments, and Emmy, who was just a top of the world fiddler. She's went on to be in that fiddle group for exceptional Vermont kids. So Becky and her husband, when the kids were getting ready to graduate from high school, made a very unusual parenting decision. They said, where in Vermont would you like to go to high school? And the kids chose Mill River, south of Rutland, and the family moved down there for them to go to high school at a very arts-oriented school. But Becky had a very interesting background, and in April of that year before they moved, she gave me this card on Yom HaShoah, which is the Jewish celebration of the Holocaust. Because there are so few left to remember, please share the names of my grandparents, Martha Hyman and Gerson Lieber. Martha was orphaned in the Warsaw Ghetto. shot when she jumped off of a transport train and hidden by a Polish farmer. Gerson survived Auschwitz and Dachau. And even though I think of it as a miracle every time I see all of you, you know, that Sunday when I'm looking out at Becky, I'm thinking, that's a miracle with all capital letters, that she was there with us. And those kinds of things, there's a lot of those stories in our congregation, and not all of them come out. Another beginning of something important, Ron Hallman shared earlier that same month that he would like to acknowledge that Heidi CVUUS, his wife, began this week as the new executive director of the Open Door Clinic. And as we know, Heidi remains the very successful director of the Open Door Clinic, which is just a very important institution in our town, serving immigrant farmers, but also a lot of other people who have trouble getting medical services. So we're very proud that we were able to mark the beginning of that and that it's still going on. And somewhat related to this, because the Open Door Clinic often appears in November when we host the Boston Consulate at its annual visit to reach out to all the farm workers in this section of Vermont who are from Mexico. From Nita, Nita Hansen was sharing her joy at the image of our sanctuary providing shelter for almost 100 migrant workers who gathered here yesterday to get official documents from the consulate, medical, legal, and advocacy services, winter clothing, and a filling meal. And then she says, a reminder, the remainder of the mulligatawny soup from our auction was what we served them. And she wanted to thank all of the people from CVUUS who helped in making that possible. And at the very end, she added, and people are still benefiting from the Rhubarb Festival because one of the consulate workers bought a pair of snowshoes she saw lying around in the basement that somebody had bought to sell at the Rhubarb Festival. So I loved that for a way all of our different things that we do in community and for others keep spilling over into each other throughout the year. They resist being bound up. Mary Conlon and her mother, the late Anne Brousseau, in November that year, asked us to join in welcoming our new grandnephew and great-grandson, respectively, Sky DeVoe Griffin, to Jamaica, and Farron Griffin. Lee DeVoe Griner is a grandma. All are doing well, and we're so happy. I can't do a service looking back at my time with you without remembering Lee. Lee came out of this congregation to become a Unitarian minister, was the person who, during my orientation in town, took me and Michelle around and said, that restaurant used to be that, and before that it was that, and before that it was that, and that there used to be a store there that sold, and gave me 100 years of Middlebury history that I wouldn't have seen without her help, and then became a colleague giving me good advice until she was struck by cancer, which she fought bravely for years with incredible help from Mary. And I think we can be proud that our congregation produces Lee and other people who've become ministers like Andrea Mall, and now Tom Morgan is in the congregation and coming out of her. So we never got it together to have a student intern while I've been here for one reason or another, but we have been cultivating professional ministry, and that's a sign of a healthy congregation. Susan Humphrey was an active participant in the early years here, and she still works with our caring network, sending out cards whenever the network asks us, although she doesn't come to church. But Susan had suffered a pretty grievous loss, the death of her son, Dan, a few years before I arrived. And during Milestones and Passages, she was often still sharing how she was processing that. And this is one of those cards. This past Monday, November 26th, was my son Dan's birthday. Dan passed away in January 2009, and he would have turned 30 this year. Also this week, we finally got a memorial plaque placed next to the fir tree that we planted in his memory at the Middlebury College Snow Bowl. The plaque has a quote on it from a Christmas poem Dan once wrote that ends with the words, "A smiling heart is all one needs." If you happen to be up at the Snow Bowl, please stop by the tree and say hi to Dan. In that card, I see a reminder that every grief is different. People process it in different ways. And our congregation has been really good, in my experience, about rolling with it and being there for people however they experience it. I think we're a very mature congregation in dealing with grief, and that's good because there's a lot of grief in this era. And I hope that you understand that that's one of your treasures. Speaking of grief, Tracy and Jay Harrington gave this card in December 16th of that first year. We're devastated by the tragedy in Newtown, Connecticut, as it is our hometown. We were both alums of Newtown High School, although we went to a different elementary school from Sandy Hook. We pray for the families in Newtown and search for ways to make sense of this tragic act. And throughout my time here, this congregation has been a leader in the community in keeping gun violence in front of people and in working on the changes that we've gradually gotten through the legislature, although there's clearly more to be done. In the category of more to be done in ways that we didn't necessarily anticipate, Ellen gave me this card on January 20th, 2013. This Tuesday marks the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court decision that ruled that the right to privacy includes every woman's right to her own medical decisions without interference of politicians. The privilege of having a choice is also a responsibility, and one that continues to need protection from some politicians who regularly introduce legislation to overturn or chip away at Roe v. Wade. And eventually, they did that end run through the Supreme Court. And the truth of that card remains there. We have to keep fighting for rights, for human rights of all sorts. Now, there's some areas where we've made progress and have not fallen back. Marnie checked in for the first of many times on the progress of death with dignity legislation in Vermont. And she said in May, passage of the end-of-life choice bill last Monday and the signing of it tomorrow afternoon will bring a long period of advocacy to a positive conclusion. I wish to thank everyone for your loving support and participation as we celebrate this historic moment for our state and nation. Alice Berninghausen serves on the board of Patient Choices Vermont, and we will be driving to Montpelier to be present as Governor Champlain signs the bill Monday. For those of you who are new to us, Marnie became acquainted with these issues when her sister used Oregon's right to life law to die with dignity and became one of the foremost non-legislative champions of this right in our legislature. So we all owe her a deep debt of gratitude, and she's continued through the years to work on the refinements that are necessary and to lobby for things like the most recent improvement, allowing people from out of state to come in and benefit from Vermont's law. Another area where I think it's been mostly progress, but now there are more signs of a threat. This card came from Judith Lashoff, who died a few years ago, Jim Burnett, who was president of the board when I came here, but he and his partner moved to Maine, and Anza Armstrong, who remains a friend of the congregation but has not been participating as a member for quite a while. And their card expressed joy that the Supreme Court struck down Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, and joy at CVUUS's long history of activism for marriage equality and embracing LGBTQ members. For those of you who've forgotten a little bit of the history, this particular Supreme Court law said that the federal government could not deny benefits to people based on their LGBTQ status. And then 2 years later, the Supreme Court ruled that there was actually a constitutional right to gay marriage. So we've been there for all of that. We've done work when it was necessary. And I'm confident that that will go on long after I'm here, because this congregation really understands, probably in a deeper way than it did even when I came, the importance of diversity in all kinds of gender and sexuality issues, and in protecting the rights of everyone. So there's lots of things that I could have said related to Francois, but this one jumped out at me, and it was from Jordan Young. It said, "I had the opportunity to visit Francois on Saturday at Fletcher Allen in Burlington. It's a cliche to say that he is comfortable, but in fact, he's not. He's getting by and misses his CVUUS family. Several of his mid-college protégés were with him when I arrived, and he seemed to appreciate the company. The outlook for his pneumonia is uncertain, but he could be home as soon as this same time next week." And I don't know, Francois, if you did make it home then, but you've made it home repeatedly from all of your adventures during my time here, and I look forward to you doing it for many years to come and remaining a treasure in our congregation. Bethany Berry gave me a note about her mother, Alice Berry, dying at the age of 101. She'd had dementia for a long time, and she was peaceful at the end. My 4 siblings and I were there with her, and we sang to her, told stories, had time alone with her. We sat vigil with her for 6 days. It's been a long, challenging road for all of us, and I'm grateful that she's finally freed of her broken down body and mind. This fits, of course, very much in with the idea that there is death with dignity. And one of the phrases that I learned in seminary, which really has come to be very true for me here, is that the last stages of life are often in the Buddhist tradition seen as falling into the heart. And I've seen that happen over and over. And one of the reasons it happens is that I think this congregation has healthy attitudes about dying and knows how to be there for the people who are surviving, and knows how to tell people who are dying that it's okay. It's okay to let go. We've also helped each other in ways that outsiders might never expect, that are just circumstance. Colleen and Doug had a card of gratitude for the support of this community when their daughter Emma was robbed in Brazil last week. Meg, Margie, and Jordan Young came to the rescue, making what could have been a very complicated situation quite easy to take care of. And that's because they had connections with Brazil. It's not every congregation that does. But you'll find that we have a lot more connections than you think when you start talking to people. I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon, but I did want to share, sometimes I just wish there was a connection. It's just for my own psychological well-being that I let myself imagine it. So Jinsey Frost, who some of you may remember, moved away to be with her kids and eventually died, moved into Eastview after my family had spent our first 9 months there, looking for where we were going to live. And Jinsey moved into the very home that we had been in at Eastview. And Jinsey sent a card, "We're going into Barnaby's cottage. Shouldn't that be a good omen?" And I'd like to feel that it had, even though I can't logically say that it did, I'd like to feel that it had some connection with her grandson making it to the major leagues and becoming an all-star pitcher. I'm not quite sure what the connection is, but I just like to feel that. I don't want to run over too much, so I'm going to skip to the last one that I wanted to share with you. And the person who submitted this to me is here today and wrote this and then said at the bottom, "My name is not necessary." It said, "Too many people I love are in pain and burdened by losses. uncertainty, too much to do, too many changes, and disappointments in themselves and others. Hold them in your hearts. My name is not necessary. Well, I'm not sure if the name isn't necessary, but if it's unnecessary, it's because we're here in body and spirit to do that holding. And even though we do all of these positive things to try to make the world better, it all starts with recognizing that all of us are in need, no matter how much we resent it, at different times. And one of our first and greatest strengths is our ability to be here for each other. And that's why showing up on Sunday, you never know whose spirit you're going to lift. And so if you're there 50-50, am I going to go today? I always say, come. You never know whose life you're going to make better. So where does this leave us all? I mean, ministers are supposed to have pearls of wisdom to tie everything together. And I don't. I didn't even write the pearls of wisdom at the end. I thought maybe I would invite you to do it, and I will invite you to do it, but not right now. All I want to say is that I know as my time leading you comes to an end, and my time returning as a congregant slowly approaches, still way over the horizon after the separation, I know this is a community that represents everything that a great congregation should be. And I have a lot of confidence that for all the challenges, you're going to find a way forward, and I'll be coming back to something that's joyous and bubbling with potential. Blessed be. So, our closing song is, I think, just a carry on from that last thought. Come and go with me to the land. Please stand in body or spirit, and extra spirit, because this is a spiritual. remember, you have permission to go any direction you want to radicalize